So Finnish technology group Wärtsilä presented its latest findings at the South Africa Energy Transition Forum in Pretoria yesterday. The rigorous analysis was undertaken on the South African power system in the midst of the current energy crisis in the country. Wärtsilä launched a white paper looking at both the adequacy of South Africa's proposed measures to mitigate the energy crisis and also the role that gas power plays in the context. To explain the white paper, we welcome on Zoom Wayne Glossop, who is a power system engineer and senior business development manager at Wärtsilä. Wayne, good morning to you, and thank you so much for giving us your time. The paper explains how we really can optimize the system, right, in order for us to tackle the power crisis in the country. Let's talk about how the paper essentially sees this being done.
Good morning, Naledi. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. So the paper was really born, we saw a need for deeper analysis on this topic of the role of gas. There's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of topics out there surrounding it, and especially within our energy crisis, what we saw was probably a lot of uncertain or maybe misdirected views on the role of gas. So we undertook the study. It was done in a completely transparent. We undertook, in fact, a public participation process when going through this analysis so that people could really comment on the inputs. And using sophisticated power system software, we could then say, this is how the energy crisis looks today. And this is the solution to solve that energy crisis for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And is there a role for gas in that? Clearly, from the analysis, there was a very important role that gas plays in our solving our current crisis.
Yeah, well, certainly the exploration of gas in South Africa having been quite a contentious issue for the past 2 or 3 years. What with the activists in the environmentalists also speaking out against some of the exploration that South Africa has wanted to look at. I mean, where in the white paper you've really looked at the role of consultation with communities that we've seen lead some of these protests. What have you found is the right way then to have those processes where communities feel that they are consulted?
So I think it's about education is a big part of it, understanding that we are in a transition and we cannot ignore the need for dispatchable energy like gas. If we ignore that, we will be paying a huge premium on our energy. And we just don't have the ability to completely shift away from fossil fuels like gas for the coming 10 years. So it's about education, understanding, all right, if we go this route, these are the benefits. And gas does bring those benefits. It brings both the cost reduction to the power system, but also it brings a very distinct emission reductions for the power system. Even though it's a fossil fuel, it reduces the net emissions for the power system, which is good for the country and good for the planet, as we can all appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, you've got two big conversations that are really taking place, and I think, you know, one could argue that they sit on either side of the rope here in this tug of war. Well, you've got those that are saying we certainly do need more energy capacity coming onto the system, and that's where, you know, conversations like what you're having about the need to bring on gas coming to the fore. But you do have the discussions around it being time for transition within the energy space and really starting to green how we power ourselves up. I mean, how do you then bring that into the white paper of what the energy mix needs to look like? How much of that is renewable, and how feasible is it then to have renewable in that energy mix?
So I think it's important to keep in mind that whilst we're saying that there's a role for gas, the primary objective of the South African power system, and any power system for that matter, should be to maximize the amount of renewable you can introduce into the power system. But of course, being the fact that you can't get the solar 24 hours or nor the wind 24 hours, you need that flexible capacity. And the study showed that you need a lot of battery capacity and you need a lot of gas capacity. Those are the two best flexible energy providers to the system. Now, those will enable more renewables. Those will put us on the trajectory to reach net zero by 2050. But to continue that trajectory, it's important that for the future we prepare ourselves for green fuel alternatives such as ammonia, such as hydrogen, and that convertibility in the coming decade is also very important to keep in mind for these projects that we undertake in the near future.
I think one of the difficult things, of course, has always been really figuring out what the ratios need to look like versus, when you look at that energy mix, right? How much of it needs to be renewable, how much of it needs to be still fossil fuels. And you, with your work with the Wärtsilä, have really modeled, 3 scenarios of what that mix could look like. Would you explain some of those for us?
Okay, absolutely. So one of the things we noticed in studies done out there, they take a perfect world view, i.e., let's assume that there's no load shedding. Let's say that the current power system is fine. But I think we need to recognize that we're starting from a very, very dark place, excuse the pun, and we need to catch up. So we modeled 3 scenarios. We modeled a planned world where we looked at the integrated resource plan and we looked at all the measures that were outlined by the president in his energy crisis speech and what Eskom's busy with. And we took another scenario called reality check. And in reality check, we said, well, what if the IPP program is delayed? What if the coal fleet doesn't achieve its availability levels that Eskom are expecting? And there was 17 measures that we looked at. And from that, you can start to see, all right, how big is this gap between our plans and what could happen? And the third scenario was a perfect world where the model does its complete optimization without any red tape, and that's the benchmark for what we should be striving for ideally. So we could then see, all right, this is how far we are away from our plans, and it turns out we are quite far away from our plans, unfortunately. But this is the solution to put us back on, given the reality check scenario. We need a lot of renewables, we need a lot of flexibility in the form of batteries and gas to get us the cleanest and the cheapest energy for South Africa.
Yeah. And we need to address red tape, which is something you've just mentioned. Before we let you go, where's this white paper going next?
So this is hopefully just the start of a conversation. I think as people read and digest the white paper, it's going to spark a lot of questions. But this is really a good, solid scientific first step in understanding the role of gas. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of further discussion to refine that message around the role of not only gas, but how we create a sustainable power mix for South Africa going forward.
All right, yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and a very interesting discussion. Certainly offering some solutions, giving some suggestions perhaps on how we deal with the energy crisis in South Africa. That way there was Wayne Glossop talking to us about the launch of the white paper, which seeks to find solutions to the energy crisis, put together there by Wärtsilä, which is a Finnish technology group.